Welcome to the Liberty Collaborative, where the past meets the present in the fight for freedom. We uncover the roots of liberty, spotlight the people who shaped it, and explore what it takes to preserve it today. If you're ready to think deeper, stand stronger, and act with purpose, you're in the right place. Let's reclaim what matters most.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Aaron Bowman. I am one of the hosts here at Liberty Collaborative Podcast, and I'm more than excited that that intro gave me some goosebumps. That it's our flagship episode, and I just am really excited to be here because of the information and content we're going to be bringing you. You're not going to be anywhere else. Now, before I get into this, I have to introduce you to the other co-hosts, and we're going to start off here with bringing up Kay Carl, followed by Chris Coyle. And then last but not least, Mike Hancock. Welcome, fellas. Glad you are here.
Hey, greetings from the great state of Alabama.
Absolutely.
So, Kay Carl, I'm going to toss it to you. If you could just kind of, give our audience, the ones that are going to be downloading this, sharing with their friends and family, a little wink, wink there for everybody listening, that, they know who we are and what this podcast is all about.
Look, I'm excited about this and to be part of this dynamic group of gentlemen here. So my name is K. Carl Smith. I'm from Alabama. Those who may have heard me and you may not have heard me, my claim to fame is that I've created and designed a persuasive messaging model where we empower and inspire liberty-minded people how to become better messengers of liberty, how to have conversations with people and not confrontations by leveraging the liberty message and the life of who I think is America's greatest liberty messenger, Frederick Douglass. So basically what we do, we teach people how to trump the race card, pun intended. And so we can inspire those, especially those in our family who've been indoctrinated to Marxism, to understand the value of liberty. And that's why I'm glad to be part of this show, because we got to impact that next generation. And Frederick Douglass is the answer to doing that. I'm a father, of course. I have 3 children, 8 grandchildren. My son, his wife have all my 8 grandchildren, and they reside about 100 miles north of me. So basically that's about me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Now, Chris, if you would please introduce yourself to our amazing audience that's going to be listening to this podcast.
Well, it's great to be here with you, Aaron, of course, Kate, Carl, Michael. And I'm really, my journey in life brought me to this podcast today and all of you through years of sitting on the sidelines, finally to be activated, motivated by seeing sort of a fundamental tectonic shift in what was happening in this country. And fast forward, meeting Kay Carl a number of years ago, I'm now effectively sort of the ambassador of the Frederick Douglass public engagement strategy in the Northeast and wherever Kay Carl needs me. And as you know, Aaron, training candidates such as yourself, writing, and really inspired to make a difference. And just thrilled to begin digging into issues and why they matter, why historical context is so important, and how you might think about current events in a different fashion.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Chris. And again, last but not least, Mr. Mike Hancock. How are you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing absolutely great. It's a little early here in Colorado, which is, of course, guys, where I reside. A little bit about myself. I'm a ex-U.S. serviceman, Air Force. I was a musician. I wasn't out on the front line fighting anybody, but supporting the troops in the background. I came to the point where I wanted to really engage more in what was going on when I began to see my great state here of Colorado go the way of what I would call the left, where our liberties are being impinged upon. And my wife and I just felt like we needed to get out and get involved. So as a result of that, I've started writing a lot. We got her elected to the city council here in Aurora, Colorado. And we're out every day fighting for our freedom, fighting for the freedom for our children, our grandchildren, and those who love the cause of liberty. That's me.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, for myself, I am also a father of five. I was also in the Air Force, left service after 20 years as a master sergeant, did 20 years with the Connecticut Department of Corrections. So I've got a military law enforcement background. But as Chris alluded to, I did run for office this past election cycle for the 54th district here in Connecticut for state representative. And that's how I came across Chris Coyle, K. Carl, and now Mike Hancock by diving into the Frederick Douglass Republican engagement method. And you're going to hear it on here, I'm sure, more than once, how powerful it is to really open up doors and have conversations that you normally wouldn't have with somebody that is more center of the road, independent, unaffiliated, or even some lean Democrats. So I'm excited to be here to bring out this information and put things through the lens of Frederick Douglass and how it makes a difference if you are having conversations with your family and friends and that sort of thing. So I'm really glad to be here, guys. This is finally glad we got this off the ground. This is awesome. We're going to have a few kinks to work out along the way and that sort of thing, but I think this is a very good start. So,
Aaron, if I might just,
yeah.
what you just said there for all of us, I think the narrative is failing our country. And by that, I mean, really what brings us together, I think one of several things that brings us together is the lack of substance in our dialogue today, the divisiveness. And as we know, values unite, issues divide. And we've seen it where people, if we can get them to reject personality politics, understand that George Washington warned us about politics for a reason. Thank you, Michael Hancock, for the great leadership on that. And Stephanie, your amazing wife. And the fact that looking back at history, what makes our country unique can help people sort out the narrative that today is divisive, personality oriented, and often superficial with no perspective or no historical perspective, certainly, and lacking a lot of factual context.
Yeah, and let me say, I run into people all the time, and that's my fundamental assessment: is that people don't know the history of this country. They don't know the Constitution, nothing about the Declaration of Independence, and the real weird thing about it is that they'll say things like so and so said that he doesn't know about the Constitution when they themselves know nothing about the Constitution.
That's a good point.
You're exactly right. One reason I'm so excited about what we're doing here, why and what we're doing is so important. You all know that George Soros, before the election, bought all these radio stations, and he didn't buy these radio stations because he loves music. That's not why he bought it.
That's true.
He bought it because he realized that if he can control the airwaves, he can get his message out there. So how to counter that, instead of just getting angry, we have to start podcasts. We
Absolutely.
can counter that. And that's what this is all about. And that's where you're going to get a message of liberty that you're not getting and your children's not getting in the school system, or you've never been taught yourself. You're going to get it here. And I will say this, and maybe I'm speaking for everybody on this show: don't believe anything we have to say. Check it out, research it before you believe it.
You know,
I tell my 14-year-old son that all the time. Don't believe me when I tell you something. He said, "Dad, you gonna lie to me?" I said, "No, son, I'm not gonna lie to you, but I want to make sure that you process everything that comes through your ears. I don't care who's speaking to you."
and K. Carl, you taught us one of the first things you taught us about Frederick Douglass. He said something like the First Amendment is the right despots fear most, because
Yeah,
without it, they know they can take over.
yeah,
And as you know, K. Carl and uh, Aaron, I've used this quote before, and Michael, when we were in our classes learning about the Constitution, I shared a quote from Sam Adams that was written sometime well before the Revolution in a paper called the Boston Advertiser. In those days, having a printing press like Ben Franklin, or in the case of Adams, was huge. And he put a quote in years before the Revolution that said the following. He said the foundation of people's ruin at first is laid in small and incremental encroachments upon their liberties. And that was years before the revolution. The point being that these slow slashes, these 100,000 cuts, and K. Carl, to your point, Aaron, you might set up this Soros thing approved in the last weeks of the Biden administration.
Right.
Sorry, I should have shared the article we're working on, guys. I didn't, but a little bit of background and throw it around. So Soros has a number of funds around the world that seek to change essentially the way governance works. In the US, he funds things like these new prosecutors who don't want to prosecute petty crime, of course, defund the police, and these sort of soft on crime attorney generals, particularly one in New York that's so controversial. But he also has an investment fund called the Soros, I think it is, Investment Management, and has been quietly buying media companies, i.e., radio stations. And there was a group of radio stations, K. Carl, I want to say like 240 of them around the country, something like that. And quietly, and of course, it was having tough times and it was in bankruptcy. The Soros Management Fund bought out the shares, bought the debt, and got a rubber stamp approval of a process that's supposed to take almost a year, including the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, got rubber stamped by the Biden administration in the last days in a couple of weeks. So instead of a thorough review, which always reviews, should we have foreign owners owning our radio stations, particularly K. Carl, Michael, Aaron, in small towns all over the country, including Hispanic stations. So now we've got a guy not subject to market forces or advertising, but 100% owned by a foreigner known to invest in things corrosive to our country, and we're trying to get attention to it.
Yeah, yeah. And he's focusing on those swing states primarily in the urban and the rural area where blacks and Hispanics are. That's his primary focus, to push his anti-American garbage.
Yeah, and I think that's why you see so many people like ourselves creating these podcasts, because I think the hyper local podcast is gonna overtake that legacy media and those news channels, because more people are gonna start tuning into folks like us that are actually providing actual material and information that they need to hear, as opposed to some far left agenda and always going back to the race of somebody's skin color, and the Republican Party isn't there to support you. You have to go with the Democrats. And I think that's why you've seen such an explosion. Everybody from Dan Bongino to Joe Rogan, who has podcasts and has millions of listeners, because people are starting to catch on to what's going on.
Absolutely. That hyper local focus, I think, is really critical for people like the folks here in this podcast to not only do podcasts, but also to write in their local newspapers, to get out the message and to be critical of those things that are literally destined to destroy liberty if we don't.
And Michael, I know Aaron's going to be playing some sponsorship spots during the course of the show, and one of them is really promoting our Substack, which will be launching Liberty Collaborative under the same name, where we'll be posting things, and obviously in the future video and all that. But one of the things, Aaron, and K. Carl, I want to point out, Michael, you were in the Air Force, Aaron, you were. There's a reason, K. Carl, you were in the Army. Our government does not allow foreign ownership of farmland around military bases. Why do they do that? It's not in our strategic interest to have the Chinese owning a cornfield next to the North Dakota missile base. Well, likewise, having a foreigner who's clear on their objectives owning these radio stations without any review is truly chilling.
It sure is, and that's a really good way to frame it, Chris. That does really kind of shed the light on how devious it has been for them to push that through so quickly.
Well, and K. Carl, you see it. You've been fighting this for 15, 17 years, but the way encroachment on civil liberties, but particularly First Amendment, works is not necessarily by commission, but by omission. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
give you an example, a shout out to a guy named John Greenwood over in New York. John brought this to our attention. These classic New York AM stations now, when they report the news, as an example, brought up Letitia James, the controversial Attorney General of the state of New York, who it turns out falsified factual information on a number of mortgage applications. And he described the fact that when they described the news, it was all about she's under attack by others, Trump specifically, and never mentioned any of the facts or details about what she had done. So, by crime by omission, and you can see that starting. That's a radio station that used to be a normal, the train, the traffic, the times, and the news straight up. Now it's omission.
They're bold about this. They don't. I think a lot of times the left believe they have liberty advocates like us over the barrel because we have not come up and stood ground with them toe to toe. We didn't have podcasts, and we kind of sat back and let things roll the way they wanted to. But now you see a lot of Americans doing what we're doing, not asking the playmaster for a platform. We're going to create our own platform.
Absolutely.
That's what Douglas did. Douglas didn't wait around for the slave master to give him a platform to speak. Douglas went there and spoke. That's what we're doing, and it's needed now.
And Kate, Carl, Michael, just all of you, I just wonder, we hear in the context of some of these non-citizens who came over from refugee camps, disrupting campuses, and we have advocates, lawyers going to court saying it's First Amendment. They can protest. And yet you look at their background, they're an invitee in the United States, and we can choose whether they want them. Well, likewise, I wonder, you look at the way things are reported, and you recognize that in a 100% owned media stations, there's an advertiser can't pull their advertising and say, well, I'm not advertising on your station because Soros owns them. He doesn't need their money.
Right.
He don't care what the listeners think, and they feed it to them. So you see these narratives happening all over where they'll spin the narrative. And luckily, MSNBC, all the traditional media, their share of audience continues to go down. Their revenue goes down. Look at the Washington Post and look at the famous NPR. So while we're letting our natural capitalist system call these people out, you've got these radio stations that aren't subject to First Amendment or market forces.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a real good point. And I like K. Carl how you brought up Douglas, and he didn't wait for his masters to let him talk or learn to read and write and anything like that. And it for me it hits home because he was in Hartford, Connecticut. I think he was here twice from some of the books that I've read. And he's there standing on his soapbox in 1883 in Hartford. I think it was in front of a church, if I remember correctly, talking, about, his viewpoints and the abolitionist movement and that sort of thing. And I think you're kind of seeing that today on a, I guess it's kind of hard to compare because travel was so much different back then, and how to go and talk about your books and your speeches. And now we have this vast internet where anybody like ourselves can get on and start talking. And I think you're starting to see a lot more than that, more of that happening. And Chris and I went down to Yale and we listened to Megyn Kelly talk, and she was, talking about how the legacy media is pretty much washed up and on its way out, and podcasts and newer radio stations, internet radio stations that are starting are where people are going to get their information because they don't trust what's being told.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
That's a great point.
And what we're going to see happen, in my opinion, is understand that George Soros has the money, but we have the truth and message. They don't have, they're divisive. That's what people are sick and tired of. And people are sick and tired of being lied to. And what happens, what they don't realize, when people get sick and tired of being lied to and being betrayed, they change how they vote. They don't continue to vote the same way.
Absolutely.
And that's going to be the downfall of the left. Their lies going to get the best of them. Their divisiveness is going to get the best of them. And when our message that we're going to share on our podcast start spreading the message of liberty through the life of writings of Frederick Douglass, who you cannot out-victimize, it's going to resonate. And it's resonating now because we've been doing this for now, over almost 13, 15 years.
And Michael, you've knocked on doors with Stephanie. I want to say through years, every door in Aurora County, practically, as I recall, and you were confronted with people looking at you. I think you should tell a story and say, "You're a Republican," and they would barely open the door, scoff at you. Talk a little bit about how opening the door using history is so powerful.
Oh, yes. Again, after experiencing during her first campaign, people, when you would say that you were a Republican, not just really almost violently slamming the door in your face or chasing you down the street and asking you why, how can you're black, how can you be a Republican? Um, After going through that for one campaign, in the very next campaign, I had certainly had enough of that, and I figured that after actually having seen Kay Carl and talked about the power of Frederick Douglass, and Frederick Douglass being a person who stood for liberty in a variety of different ways, what I decided to do was to change the script. So when they would ask that question, what political persuasion are you? I would say, well, curious, you should ask that question because George Washington, on his exit from the White House, cautioned us against having political parties, and he thought that was important because it was going to divide the nation if that ultimately ended up happening. And so when you get people and switch that whole focus from Republican Party versus Democratic Party to actually principle, to care about issues and get them to understand that you've got to know the people that you're voting for versus a personality, the orange man. How many times have we heard the orange man, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, and so that's the key thing that I discovered. If you can take them down the path of digging into history and what values this country was built around. Values from the very point in time that they were articulated have been warred, if you will, against. There's always that good versus evil thing that's going on. So anytime you do something good, there's going to be something evil that arises to combat it. So and over the years, what has happened is that a lot of the folks like us who consider ourselves to be on the side of good, we've been quiet for any number of reasons. People will find
Right.
religious reasons why. Well, it's politics. I shouldn't get involved. But it's important for us now to stand up and start to shout. I think our podcast, the Liberty Collaboration, is all about standing up for our freedom, fighting for our freedom. And if we
And
do that,
reframing the narrative, right, guys? I mean,
absolutely.
Michael, what you're saying is, okay, Carl, just listening to you and Aaron, for so long, we've sort of participated in their false narrative and tried to defend ourselves and explain. And what's so powerful, Michael and Aaron, you did the same thing. You might share that a little bit, seizing the narrative, setting the context, and bringing it back to the people. What matters to you? We share this, and it works, guys, I'd say 80, 90% of the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Hey, K. Carl, I saw you raised your hand. Did you do that on
Yeah.
anything you want to say? Or?
Hey, Aaron and Chris, I remember that day when I spoke in Denver, and as on my way, as I finished speaking, I'm on my way to the back of the room, the auditorium, to go sign books, and this gentleman named Mike Hancock was in front of the door blocking my exit. And he said to me, "Where have you been all my life?" And this guy gave me the strongest bear hug I ever had in my life. I had to tap out. I was trying to tap. I had to tap out, man. So I remember that, Mike.
Yeah, you know what? That was a transformative presentation that you gave. I'd always known about Frederick Douglass, just superficially. He's a black guy. He spoke very well and stuff like that. But when you broke it down and described the values that he stood for, how he believed that the Constitution, that was created, was our way to freedom, right? Not just freedom for black people, but freedom, right? As a people, as a nation, you had me.
Yeah, yeah. And K. Carl, as you know the story of Aaron Bowman, after just a couple hours of training, and Michael, a shout out to you and the collaboration really we've been working on for the last year, you and I and Stephanie chat back and forth. It's really Michael and Stephanie's creation of taking personality politics and warning people using George Washington's warning about the divisiveness of politics. So Aaron, you after 2 hours with the frame of personality politics don't work, political parties won't save our country, only our founding values. Tell a story about some of the. Here's a guy, you guys, who goes back. He's running as a Republican in the University of Connecticut town, Mansfield, Connecticut. And what does he do? And Aaron, they must have knocked you silly in the Air Force, some of your training, because he knocks on the doors that have Harris Walt signs in the front yard.
Yeah, I sure did. And before I got involved and met Chris, and then found out about getting back to the history of the Republican Party and looking at it at a lens with a Frederick Douglass viewpoint. I had a hard time talking to people and getting what was in my heart out about why I'm proud to be a Republican. Like I knew it, but I didn't know how to formulate those words. And so, like Chris said, after about 2 hours of some training and some discussions, I said, you know what? I'm the type of guy that jumps into everything with both feet. I don't just dip my toe in the water. I'm like, let's do this and let's see how it goes. And I went right out there, and being in a very we'll call it a very liberal town here in Connecticut. Yukon is in our backyard. We have actually more unaffiliated and independent voters than Democrat or Republican in town. And so I had my little phone out, and I walked right up, and it said, okay, knock on this address. And I said, oh boy, Harris Walt sign right out front. I said, well, let's see how this goes. And I went up there, knocked on the door, and the mother came out, or the wife, and said, oh, you should have been here. Our son's the Republican. And I said, well, I'm a little bit of a different Republican. Started going into Lincoln and Douglas, and what Douglas stood for, belief in respect for respect for the Constitution, respect for life, belief in the limited power of government and personal responsibility. And then you could see her head kind of nod, and they didn't want to take any of my palm cards at first. And then the husband is at the top of the stairs, and he goes, I'm a history teacher, I know exactly who Frederick Douglass is. And then we started having this great conversation about everything. They took my information, and then I went on to the next door. Now, if I did not know the history of the Republican Party, Frederick Douglass, Lincoln, how much Frederick Douglass was able to change things by being so outspoken and constantly being on the move, that door would have been slammed in my face. And then on election day and early voting here, I had people coming out and saying, I voted Democrat all the way down the line, except for you here locally, because I like what you stand for, your values and your principles. And it is game changing. And as Chris knows, I go to a group every Wednesday. It's Mansfield's Political Talk or something like that. And the first day I walked in, the guy that leads it started clapping. He says, folks, we finally have a Republican here. And then, of course, all the questions came. And when I went into the Frederick Douglass Republican, the gentleman sitting next to me, who is a retired attorney, said, I just want to say one thing. I'm probably the most liberal person in this room, but everything Aaron just said and his viewpoints on Frederick Douglass and Republicans and those core values, I can agree with everything he's saying. Right?
Wow.
I still go every week, and I stir the pot a little bit. Don't get me wrong. I like to get them a little riled up.
Get used to those type of success stories, because they're going to come in bunches. And what's driving all that is that, think about it. No one today, or no one period, it's impossible to win a argument with a runaway slave about his admiration for the founding fathers, his respect for the Constitution, and his liberty message. The left has no answer for Frederick Douglass, and they never will. That's why we got to be wise enough to leverage Douglass and his message of liberty in order to save our community, save our own families. For those indoctrinated family members he got who are Marxist indoctrinated, Douglass is the answer. We don't leverage him, shame on us. But it's Frederick Douglass' message that wins it, because Frederick Douglass is, in my view, the ideal embodiment of conservative values, which we don't use that word conservative, but to help you understand what I mean, I had to use it. But that's my point.
Yeah, and I use his stuff on a daily basis. Even today on X, I was tagged on a post about our AG Tong, who is filing an injunction to immediately stop the Trump administration from preserving and protecting election integrity. And that I was like, I know there's a quote that something about 3 boxes, and I had to look it up. But Douglas believed that a man's right rests in 3 boxes. It's the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box. And I'm like, why would anybody not want to have a secure election? That is our right. That is how we govern ourselves.
We do know why, Aaron. That's one of the things we've tiptoed around and been fearful that we can't bring it up. And you guys, as you know, in Connecticut, we have the famous Bridgeport ballot box stuffing scandal, and they've had people arrested by the FBI for years. You talk about a legacy of election crime, Bridgeport, but it's endemic all over. As you know, in this state, we got upwards of, I think, $3 million in Zucker bucks a few years ago. Guess where all those drop boxes ended up? They weren't in rural Connecticut. They weren't, Aaron, in your town or my town,
Nope.
but they were in particular districts. And lo and behold, they had people out at 2 a.m. stuffing them. So this isn't just like Act Blue or all these other things, Aaron. I think we're becoming more bold to call it out. Yeah, I got to give them credit. It's well-engineered scheme, all sort of different pieces coming together, but all with one thing. They want to silence the true vote of the country and supplant it with votes that they can control.
Yep, absolutely. Some great points. Well, guys, we are coming up just over 31 minutes for our flagship podcast here. And I know we had originally talked offline about, keeping this relatively short, but I think the conversation's going great. So I'll leave it up to you three as if we want to keep going for a little bit longer, or if we want to, just cut it here and let people know where they can find us and that sort of thing.
Aaron, let me propose this. Perhaps we could go around and share what we view as the benefits and the value of listeners, what they'll get listening to us. And I know we've got some exciting topics coming about. Is it a constitutional crisis, or is this the way the Constitution was supposed to work, with natural dynamic tension between the branches? We've got, of course, the whole Soros radio station that Kay Carl started to get into. We've got the tactics of being attacked by the left. We've got things like how do you deal with this claim of media bias? And then, of course, a great one. I'm just reading a book now that talks about the view of linear history or cyclical history. And it's interesting to note that a lot of people learn history, or it's taught this happened here, this happened there. And you'll hear people saying, oh my goodness, these times are unprecedented. Well, no, they're not. In fact, they're cycles. So these are some of the things we're going to cover. And as I throw it to the rest of you guys, I can't wait to do it, because I think people want to understand why it matters to them. How is it applicable to their lives? What is the context that you're not being told? What are all the facts that you aren't being told? And of course, Michael and Kay Carl, what's the historical perspective here that people can help? So when they're finished, Aaron, listening to us, and I hope, unlike, nothing against all other podcasts, but we'll give them things and ideas that will help them process news, be able to have discussions about it. Kay Carl used the term, not confrontations, but conversations, and be able to be a more effective messengers of freedom.
Yeah,
I think your mute is on, Kay Carl.
Yeah, Kay Carl, you muted yourself.
Huh.
That's weird.
Kay Carl, we can't hear you.
Might be the internet connection. Looks like he's freezing a little bit on our end, on my end here.
Video
Well, while he tries to figure that out, why don't you go ahead, Mike, and jump in there?
Yeah, I think the most exciting thing to me about what it is that we're doing is we're having deep conversations about the issues of the day, those issues that are impacting or beginning to impede our liberty, to infringe upon our liberty. I mean, history is so important. Knowing the history, knowing the Constitution, knowing what the Declaration of Independence has to say, knowing that this nation was created for the purpose of creating a more perfect union. It wasn't something perfect that was created. It was something that was put in place for us to, through the process of engagement and dialogue and discovery, to get to a point where we're going to, at some point in time, achieve freedom. It's about freedom. And there's all of these forces that have been out there for hundreds of years attempting to stop that freedom. And that's what we're really talking about: freedom versus being enslaved. And so I think just the fact that we're here engaging, inviting people to engage with us is important. And most of all, us standing up and speaking what we think to be and know to be the truth based upon values and principles.
It's not really much to add to that. Can you hear me now?
We
Yes.
can.
I don't think it's much to add to what Chris and Mike just said. They hit the nail on the head. Is that what this show is all about? Is to empower those who are listeners to become better messengers of liberty.
Yeah.
So you can get out here and become ambassadors of this podcast and an ambassador of liberty. But that's what it's going to take to save this nation. You just can't rely on the four of us. We got to empower those who are listening to this show to become better messengers of liberty and create this liberty brush fire, if you will, with the show that's going to go across this country, and by advocating the liberty message of Douglas to defeat Marxism. And I'll close by saying, you're going to learn through this show is that the most effective liberty message to defeat Marxism is Frederick Douglassism.
Absolutely. I think, everything that you gentlemen have said is, like K. Carl said, is hitting the nail on the head. I think this podcast, unlike others, is going to give people the tools that they need to go out in their communities, within their families. And like you said, K. Carl, have these conversations where before it was, the personality politics of things. And now you can go in and say, no, this is this and this is that. And having those tools available that, that Mike and I had utilized, knocking on doors. And, I think that's what people are really going to get out of this podcast. And, it's going to be great. People are going to find us on other places. I think eventually we should live stream these while we're doing them, maybe get a phone number, have people call in. I mean, let's just go all out with this.
Absolutely.
And have some fun.
Yeah.
All right, then, in closing, thank you all for watching, downloading, sharing. When you see this, you can go in the show notes. You'll have all the contact information there, where you can find us, Substack, emails, all that great stuff. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. But thanks again for watching, and we will see you all on the next episode.
Thanks for joining us on the Liberty Collaborative. If today's episode lit a fire or gave you clarity, share it and be part of the movement. Subscribe, leave a review, and keep the conversation going. Until next time, stand firm, stay free.